You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Filmmaking Conversations with Damian Swaby. Listen to conversations with award-winning filmmakers, directors from the golden age of television, and creatives from the indie film community who continue to inspire the next generation of filmmakers. And now, over to your host, Damian Swaby.
Today on Filmmaking Conversation, it's going to be a great episode. Why? Because I'm speaking to Cindy Chupack, best known as a writer and executive producer of Sex and the City, where several episodes she penned were individually nominated for Writers Guild and Emmy Awards. In 2019, she directed her first feature film, Otherhood, starring the amazing Angela Bassett, Felicity Huffman and Patricia Arquette, which was released on Netflix on August 2nd, 2019. Cindy grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and received a journalism degree from Northwestern University. She is the author of the New York Best Times seller, The Between Boyfriends book, a collection of cautiously hopeful essays. Her comic essays about dating and relationships have appeared in many magazines, including Glamour and O, the Oprah Winfrey Magazine, where she had her own columns. Her comic memoir about marriage and a baby quest, The Longest Date, Life as a Wife, was published by Viking in February 2014. Today we'll explore Cindy's unique career path, from writing for Sex and the City to her work on Modern Family. We'll discuss her passion for projects that are meaningful and funny, her commitment to authenticity in storytelling. We'll also delve into her personal experiences that have informed her writing, the moments of vulnerability and humor that resonate deeply with audiences, and the importance of the collaborative process in her work. She's taken the unconventional route, often choosing passion over paychecks, and valuing the collaborative process over the spotlight. Cindy, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, anytime. It's so amazing for me to speak to someone whose work I've watched for so many years. And initially, when I first saw your work, I had no idea this podcast would happen. In fact, podcasts weren't even around. So this is a great honor for me to have you on the podcast. It really is. I've watched some of your work, whether I've been in New York, LA, home in London, Italy, Spain. It's always been there. It's always with me. So I really appreciate you coming on. I really do.
Thank you so much. It's funny. I feel like I've been doing this so long now. The whole industry has changed, but so it's nice to talk to someone who's been following for a while.
Thank you. And, previously you've mentioned that your writing process, it's emotions and experiences. How do you think your approach impacts the authenticity and relatability of your work?
I think for me and the kind of things I like writing and shows I like writing and essays and books even, it's really important because, well, first of all, it's the most defensible because it's true to me. Okay. And then hopefully it's relatable. I mean, I always have an eye on, hopefully this is relatable, but I think after years and years of doing this, I've kind of gotten to the point where I understand if it feels true to me, like if it kind of feels like a gut punch or something I'm embarrassed to talk about, or when I'm talking to other friends, when something they're saying rings true in a new way or a way I haven't thought of it, that's going to be applicable. So most of the shows I've worked on, we work in the way that I guess Norman Lear originally worked, where just the writers in the room are talking about their actual experiences and then trying to thread that through the characters or figure out something that happened that feels true, at least the core of it feels true, and then trying to translate it to the characters. Not all shows I've worked on are quite as A to B, like Sex and the City was the most that way because I was that same age and I was dating and it was everything I was talking to my friends about. And then I've worked on shows like I'm Dying Up Here on Showtime, which was about stand-ups in the 70s. But you're still trying to find some way in that feels true and authentic to something in your experience.
So seeing that you were the same age as the characters in Sex and the City and you were dating at that time, how do you draw from your own experiences to craft these scenes, ensuring that they resonate deeply with audiences?
Well, a lot of times it was almost like group therapy in the writer's room there, but it was often things, I mean, even the very first episode I wrote, The Chicken Dance, was really based on everything that was happening in my life at the time. I had bought this house that I'm in right now by myself. And everyone said, as soon as you buy a place, someone will propose. And then somebody house sat and got engaged while they were house sitting here. So, wow. I was like, I thought it would be to me. So that kind of became Miranda's storyline. So and then everything about it. Then that couple asked me to write a poem for their wedding, and I had to write this poem for them. And then I started crying as I was delivering the poem. And then I had to like play it off as if I was overcome with emotion. So that was that was very much an A to B. Like I pretty much used those beats for the story, but I kind of split it between Carrie and Miranda, because Miranda had a new apartment. So she had her interior designer who fell in love with this guy who came to visit. And then Carrie was having to write a poem for the wedding and dealing with all the emotions that I was dealing with. But it's not always that A to B. Like, in fact, I just was listening to a podcast of one of the directors I love, Alan Taylor, who's doing House of Dragons. And he was saying that in this last episode, when one of the main characters was falling off her dragon and dying, he used an experience because he had a near-death experience. And there was a moment where he kind of let go, like just surrendered to that he was going to die. So sometimes it's more oblique like that. Like you just recognize the emotion and you're trying to put in the way you felt and the way you reacted as something very specific that feels true. And I think an audience can tell when that kind of authenticity is in a show, when people are reacting in an interesting way that feels true.
And your writing certainly often combines vulnerability with humor. How do you strike a balance between the two? And do you think the combination resonates well with your audience because of your past experiences?
Yeah, I think vulnerability, thanks for saying that. I think vulnerability is really important, at least to me. Like if you don't feel like you're taking a chance and revealing something that feels either embarrassing to talk about or hard to talk about or difficult to face about yourself and the characters, then it's just not as interesting, I think. I think it's, that's what starts to feel fresh and interesting, that someone's admitting something or talking about something that you haven't heard talked about that way. And so for me, if it's something I'm not positive it's going to reflect well on me to tell, or seems like, oh my God, am I the only person this has ever happened to? That would be terrible. Those sorts of things, or something that really makes you angry, that you feel bad, that you feel angry about, those sorts of feelings that you have kind of shame around are usually really rich territory, I think. And that's the vulnerability, is that you're discussing it, admitting it, making it human.
And you previously said the writer's room was like therapy. What were some of the other conversations going on in the writer's room, and how many people would be in the room?
Well, on all the shows I've been on, it's different. But at Sex and the City, there were, I think, 5 or 6 women and 1 man, mostly, Michael Patrick King. And then we had Greg Barrett, who was a consultant. And for example, that whole "he's just not that into you" came out of a conversation in the writer's room that was, one of our writers had been on a date and the guy had wanted to, it was supposedly a great date, but he had work in the morning, so he had to leave. So they didn't kiss goodnight or anything. And she was telling us in the room, and Greg Barrett, all the women were like, well, maybe he did have to get up early, or he had a stomach issue. We had all the reasons that could have excused them. And Greg Barrett finally said, I'm sorry, I love you, but he's just not that into you. And it became this whole discussion, how we realized, like, women, we created such a barrier around wanting to believe that. And then if it was true, wanting to like change his mind or figure out what was wrong with us, as opposed to just move on. So that became kind of a revolutionary episode idea, and then became a book that Liz and Greg wrote together. So that was a way, it started with just a discussion and then became that. And then we had, more difficult discussions, like when people had parents dying, that became episodes, or breakups, cheating, all those sorts of things that you would, start the day. Someone would start the day maybe crying or coming back from a terrible date. And then at a certain point, Michael Patrick King would be like, okay, so which of our characters are we going to have this happen to?
So it sounds like personal lives really were a part of the show, which is brilliant. It's a great source of inspiration. So did any of the men that were dating some of the writers, or maybe yourself, ever confront you or confront a writer and say, hey, I've just seen parts of my life on screen?
It was a strange badge of honor that it seemed more like men were hoping would happen, and that often didn't. Because we were pretty careful, I think, not to make it usually seem like the man's fault. We were always kind of looking at what women did that was getting in our own way. So yeah, there was more often like a guy would say, was that me? And it wasn't, or, is this going to be in the show? And you'd think, no.
Fair enough. No, I like that. Putting him in his place. And how did your experience as a writer influence your approach to directing your brilliant feature film on Netflix, Otherhood?
Thank you. Well, that film, first of all, I've had really good experiences with directors, and really usually like the 1 + 1 = 3 of having a director direct my work. And we had great directors on so many shows I worked on that I wasn't one of those writers who wished or thought I could do it better. I was kind of intimidated by the process. But then this particular movie, Otherhood, which started as an adaptation of a British book, Whatever Makes You Happy, it was something that I was handed as a rewrite like 10 years before I made the movie. It had been originally written by Mark Andrus, who is an Oscar-winning writer who wrote As Good as It Gets. And
brilliant.
Yeah, he's so talented. And I thought it was such a good script. I couldn't believe anyone was rewriting it, but I wanted the rewrite to kind of protect what I loved about it and make sure it didn't just turn into a big commercial, silly movie. So I did a really loving rewrite, I think. And then just over the years, we kept thinking it was going to get made, and then it wouldn't. And it was like either not quite commercial enough or not quite indie enough. And finally, the producer said, would you want to direct it? And so then we started this whole process of me trying to be out there with it. But what I'd say is I loved the story and the writing because it had all the elements that I love, which is kind of vulnerable and relatable and a really interesting time in a woman's life when her kids are growing up and she's starting to wonder, like, what is her identity if not a mother anymore? And what is she to this child? And is it a problem in the relationship, or is it time for her to rediscover who she is without the kid? So it kind of became all these interesting things that were interesting to me, even though I'm a bit of a younger mother. Well, I'm an older mother, but I came to motherhood late. So I have younger kids. Let's just say that. So yeah, I think everything about it, and it was a relationship between women and friends who had been friends because their kids grew up. And I was just at the age where I was starting to befriend other parents of her friends and could see how that would become kind of a lifelong bond. And you're going through the same stages at the same time. So anyway, yeah, all those things attracted me to the material and to kind of continuing to rewrite and work on the material and then work with the actresses on it and just feel like I had a solid handle on it. Because I think as the director, your biggest job is just to hold the vision and the whole of it. So even though different parts of it, I mean, I was very happy to have department heads in fact, my trick is always to hire someone that someone says they loved. Like if the recommendation comes in, he was good. I liked his work. He did this well. It's like, okay. But if they say like, I loved this, production designer, I would work with them on anything. That was the kind of recommendation I was looking for. And it really paid off. And I felt like I wanted department heads who were smarter than me and better than me in all ways. And that seemed to be seeing a similar vision I was, but also were going to add to it and cared about the characters, were really coming from character. And the DP I had, Declan Quinn, he's great. And he worked with many first-time directors, but he helped cure me of, I know you're a real camera guy, but I thought I couldn't direct because I didn't understand everything about lenses and cameras. And that was my kind of sticking point to get over in directing. And Declan worked with me just in, how do you want it to feel? What do we want the audience to feel in this scene? What's the tone of it? Is it intimate? We'd go in the spaces and talk about how we visualized it. And he just kind of cured me of that feeling of inadequacy that I didn't have the camera language for it.
Oh, that's amazing. That's the way it should be. I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah,
I think that's important. And I went through, so the Directors Guild, I think I've told this story before, but I think it's an important one. The Directors Guild has a course for first-time directors for drama, I think. I'm not sure if it's for comedy too. And I was going to do one episode of the show I was on, I'm Dying Up Here, before I did my movie. And I went through this all-day course at the Directors Guild for first-time directors. So I came in with my insecurities, which were mostly camera. And then there were DPs from, the Duffer Brothers shows that were there that were insecure about everything else, like talking to the actors and dealing with the department heads and everything that I kind of had done on television shows. And then there were actresses that came from that perspective. So it was a good reminder that, it's kind of what often they say about women, that like we're missing this, a tiny percentage of the qualifications. So we disqualify ourselves from the job. But to remember that everybody has that thing that they're insecure about. And so don't let yours stop you from, trying this thing.
Perfectly put. And the women that you worked with on the film in terms of the cast, what a great cast.
Yeah.
What was it like working with Angela Bassett and everybody else who are really, really talented people?
Yeah, I was intimidated at first. I mean, I've worked with big stars on television shows, but I felt like telling an actor, well, first of all, you're not telling an actor how to do it. So that was the wrong way of thinking about it. But with Angela Bassett, I remember the first day, and she's just a goddess among goddesses. Like when she came for the table read, she just has this star power charisma. And she was the first one in who signed on to the film. And you pretty much need someone like that. So then the other actors will say, oh, well, Angela Bassett's doing it. And Angela's people want someone of, a high enough caliber. So the caliber of the movie is going to stay high. So that first one in is so important. And I felt so grateful that she believed in me and the movie enough to sign on like that. And that helped us attract Felicity Huffman and oh my God, how am I forgetting I'll remember in a minute. This is me getting old. But anyway, I feel like my first day, I was really nervous to give Angela direction, or I think I said one thing and she kind of disagreed with it. She didn't think she would hug them or go outside the door to hug them. It was something small. And I just got kind of spooked and didn't try to correct her. And it felt awkward. And then a little bit later, she came up to me and she said, you have to not be afraid to give me direction. It's fine. Like she really saw that I was doing that and saw that, she still needs it. Every actor still is looking forward to you telling them what you think in your perspective, at least.
That's very good. That's nice, because potentially it could have been an ongoing situation that nobody would have appreciated and may have affected the outcome of the film, but it certainly didn't, because I love the film, as I said earlier. And one thing I love about Netflix and some of these streaming platforms is that the evolution of TV and film, they're a large part of it. And how do you think the landscape of TV and film has changed since you started your career? Are there any positives that you can tell us about?
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, it was Patricia Arquette was my third actress. I can't believe I forgot her name, Patricia Arquette. She was amazing. Yeah, I think TV's changed so much. I mean, when I started out, it was a lot of mostly for-camera sitcoms in front of a live audience, and at least for comedy. And you had the instant feedback. It was a whole different process. And then, but it also felt like there were only the, main 3 or 4 networks once Fox came on the scene. And all the pilot season was at the same time. Everybody was shooting pilots at the same time. It was a real rigid schedule. All the actors it seemed like a stupid process at the time. Like, why are we doing all this at the same time? And it's so rigid. And like, this is when we know if the show's going to go. This is when you know if your script is going to be filmed. This is when you know if you're going to get the green light to do more. And now I kind of miss that, because now it's sort of the Wild West with so many streamers, so many outlets. Yeah. Development can go on forever. Sometimes you don't even really get a pass. You're just waiting and you finally are kind of ghosted or the network dissolved. So sometimes I miss that stupid situation we had before. But the good news is I think it allowed the whole world of entertainment to be much more global. Like now I love shows from Australia, and I've always loved shows from London, and I'm working on a show with some writers from London now. And it's, it used to be in America, for whatever reason, people felt like if there was a British show, we had to make the American version, which I never fully understood because it's still in English. And I used to love to be very dry. So now I feel like people are getting more used to shows from Israel, shows from all over the place. And it kind of reminds us how universal these feelings are and how important diverse voices are, and that we want to see storytelling from a lot of different lenses to bring us closer together and to just, have us think about things in a way we didn't. So I think that's good. I think the danger now is that we let in all these diverse voices, at least in America, who are so talented and good. And there is partly why we had the writer's strike, because there just wasn't a very clear path from your first job to stay in it. It's not the same kind of mentorship and you're going to set for your episode and just certain things that were a little bit more ingrained when I was coming up. So it's a little bit, I think, harder for the new voices to find the path and to be able to make a living doing it the way it works now. But I think all in all, on balance, it's great that there's so many outlets, voices, different kinds of shows, different ages they're appealing to. It's not all the, certain age white male that it used to be when I was doing television early on, where it didn't even really seem like they wanted a female audience that much. So I think that's all positive.
What were the shows you enjoyed growing up? What inspired you and made you laugh and everything when you were a kid?
Well, I loved Mary Tyler Moore, Rhoda, Carol Burnett's show. I also really loved The Twilight Zone, which, it was like an anthology series. And later I did an anthology series for NBC that just was short-lived, but it was kind of based on sort of like Love American Style, which was also an anthology series that had 3 love stories. And they weren't connected on that show, but in mine, I tried to connect them. It turned out that was a very ambitious idea to try to do for a network hour that was going to be every week and was going to have basically 3 pilots in every episode. Wow. I originally thought, well, if they're all good, that'll be the connection. But it was really hard because I didn't anticipate the network would have feelings about each new scenario, characters. That was when I was like, oh, this is why people do a show in a hospital and have the same characters, the same set. It's just case of the week. Kind of saw the beauty of the procedural. So, but anyway, that was inspired kind of by Twilight Zone, because that was always a different writer and different actors and just a really interesting, had a tonal similarity of being kind of like Black Mirror is now. And I remember thinking, I grew up in Oklahoma and didn't know anyone doing anything like this, but I remember thinking at one point, someone's writing those. It must be that would be so cool to be writing that kind of thing, because it just seemed so creative and I always liked writing.
You certainly do like writing, and your writing is diverse and it's been incredibly successful. We Waited for You, your first children's book, was just released. What inspired you to write a children's book, and how was the experience different from writing for adults?
Well, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit I have sort of a professional bucket list of things I'd like to have done. I always think of it like that. Not like I have to do them, but I would like to have done these things. And writing a children's book was on there always because I loved them when I was younger. My mom used to read to me and my sister. And then when I had my daughter, I just saw how impactful they were. They were really how she learned so many things, like her sense of humor. And they answered so many questions that were with her at the time. But she was adopted, and I felt like none of the books for a new child really spoke to our experience. Not just that she was adopted, because there are books out there for if your child is adopted that are kind of like, we got the call, we ran to Jamie Lee Curtis has a good one. But I felt like, why isn't there something that's more universal for just however a child came into your home? I had a lot of gay friends who did the whole, had to get a surrogate. And I had many friends who also adopted abroad, adopted domestically. So just something that was like the process for parents, which could be so long. And then how glad you are when this child finally joins your family, and that, so that was the sort of the We Waited for You idea. But I wanted something that just celebrated a child joining a family, however it happened. And that was where it came from.
So it's clear you see storytelling as a tool for change. So how do you see storytelling as a tool for social change, especially considering your involvement with the Los Angeles Giving Circle?
Yeah, the Giving Circle tries to shift power in state legislation, in state legislatures, because in America right now, we just need some other firewalls. Seems like things are falling apart at the top level. And if things are going to go to the states, then at least getting good legislators in to try to protect reproductive rights and all the things that we, gun safety, everything we care about, maybe it can be safeguarded at the state level. That's kind of the work I've been doing there. I believe a lot of change just, for example, I've been pretty involved and really concerned about the reproductive rights getting stripped away right now. And I feel like the more we can show decisions around abortion, and that it isn't always like a heart-wrenching decision. It can be a family that already has kids. So kind of trying to normalize things and help people expand their idea of when and why something would be part of the conversation is important. And in fact, I look back on Sex and the City, we had an episode where Miranda was considering it, and she finally decides to keep the baby. And that's what happens a lot of times in television shows when they address abortion. And even then, I thought we were pretty forward thinking because we were able to try to be honest about which other characters we thought might have had an abortion. And we said that Carrie had one. And that was, something that we were just trying to be true to what we thought would be true to her character. And since we didn't have advertisers on HBO, we could do that without pissing anyone off. That felt at the time rather revolutionary. But now looking back, I feel like we sort of took the easy way out that people often take, where you have the conversation about it, but then they decide to keep the baby. And that's the happy ending. And that's not really helping make the case for that an abortion should also be a legitimate action to take. So I believe in television and also sort of showing women and showing a lot of diversity in leadership positions or in different roles that you might not be thinking is the typical how you see them on TV is important, just so that kids growing up and people growing up can see role models at all different levels. You can kind of write the world as you wish it was, I guess, and then see if it changes it. Working on Modern Family and seeing how people reacted to that gay relationship that was treated just very much like the straight relationships, it made such a difference on how so many people here thought about gay marriage at a time when that was it felt like there was the liberal view of it, which was it's totally fine. And then there was the other view that it was breaking all the rules of what a marriage should be. And I think that kind of broke down those walls. So I feel like television and film can be a good way to show the world as we would like it to be, and also to just show the world as it is that people are ignoring. How about that?
How about that, for sure. And your passion for diversity and inclusion is clear from this interview. Do you think you could ever make a documentary about some of these issues?
Maybe. I watch a lot of documentaries. I'm not sure, because the documentaries that I like I've been watching a ton of cult documentaries. I don't know why. Or sports documentaries where someone almost dies, kind of like, I guess, survival in different ways. I'm not sure, but it would be interesting. But I do feel like that's what I do with my essays that I write, because those are first person and can really be my point of view on things. And I've tried to write about things I feel like people aren't really talking about, like even all the infertility issues that I went through before I had my daughter. That was a book I wrote that was very much about marriage, but it was also about that whole baby quest. And that was something I felt like people weren't talking about. And I wanted to kind of normalize that. So I feel like that's one way I can do it.
And your work as a whole, you're working with Northwestern University archives to house your life's work. How does it feel to look back on your career and see your contributions being preserved for future generations?
Very heady and crazy. I can't believe it was so terrible to be looking through my things thinking, how can anyone possibly want to see this in the future? Because it's not all scripts with my notes on it. It's mostly journals with my diet diary or half-written stories or notes or lists but anyway, it's been really interesting. The most interesting thing about it, and it's also just a real honor, is I did save a lot, and my mom saved everything, and it's been very validating to her. I always say that she's like, see, this is why I saved everything. But it's been nice just to think of my life as this collection of things I've done, because I think the thing I was realizing is there's not necessarily an order to the way things happen, and you don't always do one thing and it leads to a bigger thing and a bigger thing and a bigger thing. Sometimes you do one of your favorite things early on And I don't think that's sad. It's just great that you got to do it. And that doesn't mean everything after it pales in comparison. So I guess that's why I've been trying to do different things. Like I'll try drama if I was used to comedy, or I've been now working on, adapting a book, or I did the movie, or I try to do essays or a children's book. I try to just try a lot of things that will still push what I'm learning. And then that whole becomes your life legacy or just your life. And I don't think I saw it that way. And I feel like when people are just graduating, they're thinking, what do I want to do? And I need to know what I want to do. And I need to be on the right path to do the thing I want to do. And I feel like I have the privilege now of looking back and thinking, I didn't really know that first essay I wrote was going to lead to television writing. And that first really shitty show I was on was going to lead to Sex and the City. And Sex and the City was going to lead to writing a book. But I just sort of, I guess, followed what I was most interested in and what I found funny and worth talking about and writing about. That would be the through line. And then my other through line has been that I don't always take a better paying job, which is a huge luxury right now. But I just always tried to take money out of the equation and figure out what I thought I could really, would enjoy doing and would love doing and could believe in. And I also don't always feel like I have to run the show. So I've worked on a lot of shows where it's just a good show. And I think I could learn a lot there. I would love to write it. I could contribute a lot. And I just want to be part of it. And I don't feel like it's a failure that I didn't create it or that I haven't gone on to create and direct. And, I think a lot of writers feel like those are the pinnacles. And if you don't get to create it, it's not really something you can be that proud to be a part of. But I just have really enjoyed being part of some great shows that I wouldn't have created, but I'm really happy to have worked on them. And it's also a much more sane existence when it's not your show.
As we wrap up this episode, let's reflect on the invaluable insights we've gained from our conversation. We delved into the process of writing for television, where authenticity and personal experiences play crucial roles. Our guest shared how the blend of vulnerability and humor makes storytelling relatable and impactful, drawing from her own life to create memorable and genuine narratives. We also explored the dynamics of the writer's room, liken it to a group therapy, where personal stories become the foundation for character development and plot lines. This episode highlighted the importance of embracing one's emotions and experiences to craft stories that resonate deeply with audiences. The educational value here is immense, offering a behind-the-scenes look at how some of our favorite shows are created. Whether you're an inspiring writer, a fan of television, or simply interested in the creative process, this episode provides a wealth of knowledge on the power of storytelling and the significance of staying true to oneself in the creative journey.